This aircraft, originally designed as a high-speed airliner, was converted to a light bomber to make use of its speed, as at the time of its development it was faster than most contemporary fighter planes. But just like many other designs from the mid-1930s, by the time it was used in combat, the advances in aviation technology made it almost obsolete. It still flew many missions in the early years of World War II and served as a starting point for other successful designs. So let's see the history of the Bristol Blenheim light bomber. The story of this plane starts in the early 1930s, when Bristol designed their first twin-engine low-wing monoplane, the Type 135. This aircraft resembled closely to the Lockheed Electra 12, which was not an accident, as the initial idea of the plane sparked after the company's chief designer, Frank Barnwell, made a research trip to the US. While the work on the design was ongoing, it caught the interest of the owner of the Daily Mail, Lord Rothermere, who, inspired by the German aircraft industry of the time, which produced several record-breaking aircraft, thought the British industry should compete with the Germans. He actually had an idea to establish flights between the major cities of Europe with very fast executive planes. To meet his request, Bristol modified their plans and the Type 142 was born, which, to achieve the required high speed, had aerodynamic improvements, the cross-section of the fuselage was reduced, and the original Bristol Aquila engines were replaced by 640 horsepower Mercury 6 ones. It was a very modern design for the time, a low-wing monoplane featuring an all-metal skin, retractable landing gear, and a stepless cockpit. Lord Rothermere actually paid a sum of £18,500 to Bristol in advance for the development of the aircraft, which would be some £1.2 million today. The estimated top speed of the aircraft was 240 miles an hour, but when it took to the air the first time in April 1935, it surpassed that by some margin. The plane managed to reach a top speed of 307 miles an hour, which in 1935 was very impressive. This performance didn't go unnoticed, and the Air Ministry became interested in the type. They actually asked the Lord to land the aircraft for them for testing and evaluation, but he instead chose to donate it to the RAF. The aircraft, Britain First as Lord Rothermere named it, was delivered to the RAF in June 1935. The flight test confirmed the top speed above 300 miles an hour, and the plane even managed to reach 285 miles an hour speed, fully loaded. The encouraging test resulted in a new ministry specification in August 1935 to modify the aircraft to fit the light bomber role with a 3-man crew. Bristol started working on the modified Type 142M. To adapt the plane to the role, it needed a lot of modifications, but the main ones were: the wing had to be raised from the low position to make room for the bomb bay, a machine gun was added in the port wing, and a semi-retractable dorsal turret installed at the back, housing a single machine gun. The reason behind the weak defensive armament was that the new bomber was faster than most contemporary fighters, like the Hawker Fury or the Gloucester Gladiator biplanes. This gave the force confidence that these new fast bombers can avoid interception, and they won't need fighter escort to carry out their missions. The designers and military planners seemingly completely ignored the new developments in fighter designs, which, as it turned out later, was a big mistake. But in their defense, they were not alone in thinking the new faster bombers will be immune to fighters, as this seemed to be the general view around the world in the mid-1930s. The Germans made the same mistake with their new bombers, for instance the Heinkel HG-111, and the Italians were no exceptions either, for example with their SM-79 design. Both of these bombers participated in the Spanish Civil War, and in that conflict they did very well against the slow biplanes they faced, filling both nations with false confidence in their aircraft. I have already made videos on both the HG-111 and the SM-79 Sparviero, so if you're interested in their history, check them out. But of course the rapidly advancing technology was not confined to the bombers, and the arriving new monoplane fighters had unprecedented speed and firepower compared to the early 1930s biplanes. The new German Bf-109s, the British Spitfires and Hurricanes both became very unpleasant surprises to the other side's bomber crews in the upcoming war. The RAF actually did not wait for the Blenheim bombers to be built and tested. In September 1935, they already placed an order for 150 units, as the expansion of the RAF was somewhat urgent. The first production Blenheim Mark I was delivered in June 1936, and it served as the prototype for the flight tests. In addition to the earlier mentioned changes, it received stronger 850 horsepower Bristol Mercury 8 engines, and it made its maiden flight at the end of the month. The military version was about 2,000 pounds heavier than the original Type 142, but still had a top speed of 281 miles an hour. In December the same year, when the testing of the prototype ended, the type was ordered in full production. The deliveries of the production variants to the RAF squadrons began in March 1937. But the development of the aircraft didn't stop with the first production models, so let's take a quick look at the later variants. The Blenheim Mark I was the first production variant, equipped with 850 horsepower Bristol Mercury 8 engines. This variant had a maximum bomb load of 1,000 pounds. 1,552 were built. Sub-variants of this version were the Bristol PR Mark I, which was a photo-reconnaissance variant, and the Mark I-F, which was equipped with a gun pod under the belly, mounting 4 7.7mm machine guns. It was used as a long-range escort fighter before the more advanced planes like the Beaufighter took over. It also had a night fighter variant carrying radar equipment. The Mark II was an intended long-range variant, with additional fuel tanks in the wings. The added fuel and strengthened airframe, however, increased the weight of the plane, and as a result the top speed of this variant was only 236 miles an hour, so the project was cancelled. The Mark III was actually the one modified aircraft to serve as the prototype for the following Type 149, which then became the Blenheim Mark IV. The Mark IV was not a straight development from the Mark I, but from the Bristol 149, which was an answer for a new ministry specification. The original mock-up featured longer cockpit, where the windscreen reached all the way to the end of the nose. This was soon modified because the distance from the pilot caused a lot of glare and reflections. A more conventional cockpit design was used, but to improve visibility on landings, the left side of the nose was lower. This variant was upgraded to 995 horsepower Mercury 15 engines, and had a range of 1,460 miles, compared to the 1,100 miles on the Mark I variant. It also had a fighter version, just like the Mark I, carrying a gun pod under the belly. The Mark V was a proposed ground attack variant in 1940, which was developed under the ministry specification B640. The Type 149CS was an evolution of the Blenheim Mark IV, featuring a new solid nose housing 4 7.7mm machine guns, and some 600 pounds of armor plating was added to protect the plane during ground attack missions. Originally it would have a new designation as Beasley, but later it was renamed to Blenheim Mark V to avoid confusion. By the time this variant reached prototype phase, the Battle of France was lost, and there was no immediate need for a close air support plane. So one of the prototypes was modified to bomber role, featuring a bombardier position and glazing on the port side of the nose. To make room for the bombardier under the sloped nose, a valve was installed for his legs at the bottom. It also featured a new dorsal turret with dual Browning machine guns, which required a bigger cutout on the top of the airframe. The Blenheim was 42 feet 7 inches long, with a wingspan of 56 feet 4 inches. It had an empty weight of 9,790 pounds and a maximum takeoff weight of 14,400 pounds. The plane used 2 Bristol Mercury 15 engines, producing 995 horsepower each. With these engines it could reach a maximum speed of 266 miles an hour and a cruise speed of 198 miles an hour. It had a range of 1,460 miles and a service ceiling of 27,260 feet. Its armament consisted of 4 or 5 7.7mm machine guns, one in the port wing, 2 in the dorsal turret, and 1 or 2 in a strange rear firing under the nose blister, which was later replaced with a limited traverse turret. The maximum bomb load of the plane was 1,000 pounds internally and up to 8 40-pound bombs externally. When World War II broke out, there were 2 Blenheim squadrons in England and 11 others in North Africa, Middle East and in Singapore. Very few Mark I saw action in Europe, as by 1939 most of the squadrons already started conversion to the Mark IV variant, but the Mark Is were still used in the Middle and Far East. The first British mission was flown on the day the war was declared, when a single Blenheim flew a reconnaissance mission over Wilhelmshaven. The next day 15 of them performed a bombing mission against the port. This mission somewhat foreshadowed the bombers' fate in the war, as it was not a successful attack, but they suffered losses for the little damage they caused. During the Battle of France, they flew missions against Germany as part of the expeditionary forces. During their missions, they suffered considerable losses, as it turned out the Blenheim was very vulnerable to enemy fire, especially on the tail section. On 14th of May 1940, 71 bombers were deployed against German forces, and 40 of them were lost. Very early in the war, it became obvious that the plane that was chosen for its role because of its speed has lost its advantage against the new, more advanced fighters, and its weak defensive armament didn't help with the survivability either. The Blenheims also participated in the Norwegian campaign, where again they suffered heavy losses, but many of that was caused by harsh weather and cold conditions. They were heavily used during the Battle of Britain as well, flying missions against German airfields, ports and other targets, both in day and night attack missions. Some of these missions resulted in almost 100% losses, but even on their better days, the Blenheims usually suffered at least 25% casualty rate, which was well above the average. But since there was no other aircraft to replace them, they stayed in service. Early in the war, the F variants were also deployed in the fighter role, but they proved to be too slow and sluggish, so soon they were only used as night fighters, until the new Bristol fighters replaced them from mid-1940. The Blenheims also took part in the fighting in North Africa, against the Italians and later the Germans. Actually, they were the most modern bombers available to the RAF in that theater until 1941, when the Martin, Maryland and Baltimore bombers started to arrive. The Blenheims were almost completely retired from combat operations by 1942 over Europe, as more modern bombers took their place. They still participated in the fighting in Southeast Asia, flying from India and Singapore, but the type became more and more obsolete, and by 1943 most of them were withdrawn from the front line and only used as trainers. The plane that was built for speed and chosen for its role because of it became the victim of the very fast technological advance of the late 1930s, just like many others. It still did its part in the early years of the war, until the more advanced designs took its place. The experiences gathered with the type helped developing the later Bristol Beaufort, and from that the Bristol Beaufighter planes. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.